Okay, so welcome to Development Lesson 6. Today we're going to be talking about DOM manipulation. DOM is the document object model, which is basically how you would access any kind of HTML using HTML using JavaScript. So if I open the Elements tab, you see this is all the HTML here. But I can also change some of that HTML from the console, basically JavaScript. So to if I go to blank web page here and in the body, if I add in something like a header, I can actually use methods to change how this header is shown. For example, I can I can select it. If I run this text will change to bye bye. So that is using the document object model. And since we talked about objects last week, I presume that you all remember what objects are. And the uh, document object model basically just takes the HTML and makes it so that JavaScript can access it using objects. So few big things, you have the document keyword. So to access anything within the DOM, you need to use document. It's going to be document dot something dot something, or you can use bracket notation. So that's going to be a bit more of a hassle to type out. And basically, everything, every HTML document has a head and a body. So we're going to have document.body and document.head that refers to each of those things respectively. And you can access document, the keyword from basically everywhere. Its scope is global, and you do not have to like declare it. It's basically a preset, just like window. So first of all, you want some way to be able to identify this HTML element in order for JavaScript to get it. An easy way to do that is using an ID. So an ID is just a string basically, but as an attribute. So in any element, you can have like, for example, this div ID equals and then followed by the string, whatever ID you want. And now this ID basically has a sticker on it saying your ID or like whatever your ID is. And then from JavaScript, you can do something like document.getElement by ID. And that is actually going to go through all the elements and look for the specific one that has the ID that's the exact same as the one you put in as an argument. So it's basically going around and looking for the element with the sticker that says your ID and then selecting it. So basically, if you want to build something that you want to use JavaScript to manipulate or change anything about, you can use ID to identify it and then get element by ID in order to select it from JavaScript. If you don't want to use ID or because ID, you can only use it once on every element, and also it's kind of a hassle to type out. You can only give a unique ID to each element, so you can't have two elements with the exact same ID. You can also select stuff by class. So this can either just be out of convenience or you specially assign a class to these elements so that you can select them. Now, if the thing is multiple elements can have the exact same class, there's no restrictions on how many elements can have the same class. So when you're gonna try and select it, it's got elements with an S by class name. So what it's returning isn't really the HTML element, it's a list of HTML elements. So you- if I only have this one element with class equals red bold in the HTML, then I can get the first element, the zeroth index of that list that I just made when selecting every element that has the class name red bold. I'm going to get the zeroth one of that, which is the first element, and that is going to be the one I want. So if I have multiple and I want to select, say, the second one, then I'm going to do like element square bracket one instead of zero. Where this comes in useful is when you have a series of elements that are very similar, for example, like a keypad or something, and you want to select them all and iterate through them like as a list. You can just give them all their class and then select everything with that specific class. And then that will give you basically an array that you can iterate through instead of having to select each one by ID separately. So also if you don't even want to use classes, you can basically just select by tags. And I personally do not recommend this because it's very easy to get confused. And also, if there's other JavaScript running, for example, like every single extension in here that modifies the page will add their own elements that are like one by one pixels, or you can't see them, but it will still mess up the kinds of tags there are. So, for example, say like Grammarly adds a div somewhere that helps that like I can click on in order to open the Grammarly panel. Well, that's an extra div. So if I want to select the 23rd div on the page, then if Grammarly sets itself as the first div, then then what I truly want is going to be the 24th div. I have no idea that's the case. So I could very well end up selecting the wrong div or having it very inconsistent on different devices. And this is pretty much the same way that classes work, where you select elements by tag name and then it gives you an array and you can get the separate elements by going into the array and getting and accessing them through the index. Now, after you've selected something, you can assign it to a variable or you can just directly work on it by doing dot some property. So it's, for example, inner HTML. So basically that element has a key that's called inner HTML, and that basically corresponds to what's inside the element, the content of the element. So if I have a div that basically just says this is a div, and but then I use and then I select it by using like get tag name or get ID, and I do dot inner HTML equals something, it's gonna go in there and basically just set whatever the content is of the div to the string. So in essential, what what I was doing here, if I run this again, it's gonna change to bye bye again. So now you can probably see basically understand what I'm doing here. You get the elements by tag name h1, and since there's only one, I want the first one, so I'm gonna get the 0th index of that. Once that's selected, I do dot inner HTML equals bye bye. But now what the DOM is basically doing is it's taking that within the string, going here and saying I'm just going to replace hello with bye bye. And even if I do something like if I put a link in there, so uh, if I put a link to Google in here, what it's basically doing? Oh, oh, I want that. what it's basically doing is just taking this, whatever's in my string, and it's gonna take whatever is in my string and copy that. It's going to go in here between the tags, and it's basically just gonna put that in. Except, uh, except that uh, Chrome DevTools is smart and sets the text instead of the HTML. So instead, I'm gonna do edit this as HTML, and I'm just gonna paste this in now. So now this should work. Basically, just taking whatever it was in the H1 and then replacing it with the tag, and then the link pops up. So to recap, inner HTML, inner HTML is just to set whatever is inside the opening tag and closing tag as HTML. So it does not care what you put in there. If it's plain text, it will show you plain text. If it's another element, it will put that element inside. Uh, Now this you saw previously when I was double clicking in here to set the inner HTML, it was actually trying to set the inner text. So we can also do that in JavaScript. Basically, it's the exact same thing, except that it doesn't parse anything as HTML. It's basically telling the browser, oh, I just want to set this as the text inside. So even if I put in an element, it won't recognize the element because it's not trying to get any HTML elements. It's just saying, oh, here's a less than sign, here's an A, here's some parentheses, here's another greater than sign, there's a less than sign, there's a slash. So it's not going to see that as an element. Now, where this is useful is where you have the user going in to do something like, for example, you're going to have the user input a sentence that you want to display. You're not going to want to use inner HTML because potentially they could like run a script or something on your website, which would not be good. So you would want to use inner text in order to prevent that from happening. So whatever they input is going to be parsed as text and it's going to be safe. So from last time, you have the RICHCODE.js static repository. You can just work on the next project, like whichever one is next. For me, it's project 2. You may have it at like project 5 or something. And basically just make a new file that's project something, and you'll be able to run it as an HTML file. So I'll give you a bit to work on that, say 9 minutes. Okay, so I just wanted to show you guys something real quick. And this is basically Aries. You may also have it as your like grades platform. So basically, something you can do on Aries, you can open the calendar, like add new event, and then in here, actually, there's like a flaw in here. So if I do something like I add a button, this is supposed to be the title of the event, by the way. So if I do a button on click, is and I'm gonna do something like window.alert. Hello, sorry, and I close the button and I click add event. Oh, sorry. Uh, oops. Wait, I'm gonna reload. So wait, let me scroll back there. So here you see it's literally just a button now. It's a button. It was put in as inner HTML. It was not put in as inner text. What I believe happened was like this page actually uses PHP instead of JavaScript for these forms. So this is going to be a similar situation, but what they did not sanitize the info at all. So now if I press this button, it's going to say hello. Yes, I already told people, and like nobody did anything about it. So like for now, it's just like a really neat thing. It's like it just shows you even like these big companies that are widely used, they can make all sorts of mistakes like this. So every time you make an application, just be sure to check. Make sure that there's no chance of something like that happening. Okay, so you have around you're gonna have around 7 minutes left. Finish this. Okay. Just a quick show of hands. Does anyone need more time? There's around 2 minutes left on the clock. No? Mhm. Okay. So, then continuing on, uh, wait, sorry. Would anyone want to share their solution in the chat? No? Okay. So, aside from just manipulating just the inner content of each element, it can also dynamically just change the attributes of HTML elements using that attribute. Since there's .html, inner HTML equals or .inner text equals, can use .set attribute. So, for example, if you want to disable a button or you want to uh change class of an element, so for example, light mode, dark mode, or change the type of an input, you can use this. So we can here's the Mozilla WebDocs on this. Basically just name and value. Here's okay. So to open the playground here. So we have a button here. What we're doing right now is we're setting the name of the attribute name to hello button and stable to true. And if we look at this, its name will be hello button and disabled equal, and it's disabled. So we can also do this dynamically using a function. So you wouldn't really want in a real website, it would be better just to do like name equals the hello button and disabled. But it would be better if we could do this inside a function. So function disable. So for example, if you want to have a function that will disable itself once you click it. So for example, something you can only click once, a form submit button, so people don't spam it because it's taking a long time to load. So once I click this button, uh, once, once I click this button, it should disable. So, mm, so yes, if I click this, it will disable itself. So this is going to be useful if you want to have something that will change once you click it or prevent you from clicking it after you click it. So if we have two classes here, class one, color red, black, class two, color is going to be one. Then I have class equals class one. I can just I can just go here and change class to uh, two. So when we run this and wait for it, hmm, something is not happening, right? So I'm gonna try background color instead because that's gonna be more noticeable and it's still not behaving. So I will hmm, I will try it and hit in here. So here and we do not have a JavaScript link, so just separate script tag then. So everything appears to be functioning. We'll start this up, open this, and go to forward. Hmm. Hang with me as I try to resolve this. So I do not think the style is actually registering here. So uh, moving on for now. You can also change CSS without just changing the whole class of something. So for example, element.style, you can use element.style and then change any attribute. So for example, here I have the border. So instead of having it in the CSS, I can just do element.style and then dot border equals red 1px solid, or I can set the font family. So if I want to dynamically change the font, okay, now to inputs, we can make using input element, we can make a text box and read its value using JavaScript. It's a special element in HTML that does not actually need a closing tag because it will not be containing anything. So for example, so the Blue 3 schools are going to want to use form for this. We're going to learn that later. So as you see, usually you're going to have a label and you're going to have an input, and this input actually does not have a closing tag because it's just a text box. There's no reason to close it. And there are going to be a ton of different types of input put in. And so for example, like here you have regular text input, here's a password input. So whatever I type here is gonna show up like that. So I could like type in my password here and you could literally not see even though I'm like sharing my screen. Oh wait, so and then there's type submit. This is useful for forms if you want to submit something and it's gonna look like a button, but usually just use buttons. Uh, reset. This is also a form specific one. Radio. Usually you're gonna want to use a form for this, but it's also possible to use just JavaScript. Basically, just select one of the options, like for example on the text and checkboxes. There's a type button, which basically just is a button, but its element is just an input. And this one's kind of neat. It's a color picker. So if I click on this, it's gonna let me pick a color. If you're on a different device, I'm on Windows 11 computer, it's going to show up differently because what's essentially happening here is just your computer is registering that as a color picker and using the default API for that. I can just use this to give it whatever color I want, and it's going to return as some kind of text value or RGB. This is useful if you want to set the background color of something. So I will ending this. I'm going to have an input type equals color, and the ID is going to be color picker, and I'm gonna open a script so that I can select it. So right now I'm going to use the ID because I have an ID. So document.get element by ID is going to be, I'm going to set that to color picker. I'm so sorry. Take, I need to take care of something. Sorry about that. Okay. I'm gonna I'm gonna get the ID color picker, and then I'm gonna set the set attribute. Actually, no, I'm going to use dot style dot. Hmm. I would rather set the background color. So I'm actually gonna store this in a variable color picker equals that, and then I'm going. So I can have another. I can have a button here. Change. Change. And that's going to read the value of color P. So P dot value, that's going to return as a hex value. So we can just do a body dot, uh, yeah, mm, I'm, I'm going to make another div. I'm going to get display, and I'm going to set the style dot background color equals color P dot value. And if I run this, this is still running. Go to project 4. I'm going to choose random color here. Oh, body is not defined. So I'm going to choose red. Click, click this, and something should be running. There we go. So if I want to set it to green, turns green if I wanted to set it to yellow, turns yellow. What this is useful for, you want the user to be able to pick a color for something, so like create their own custom theme, instead of like inputting a hex value or having to code something extravagant for a color picker. There's already something that's built in that you can easily use. So input, in order to get the value of it, you're not going to use inner HTML or inner text because logically speaking, it doesn't have a closing tag, so it doesn't have an inner HTML or inner text. So instead, it's going to have value. And where this comes from is actually I can go to any input here and do value equals so FFF. And if I reload this, you see the default value that comes out is going to be white. If I'm going to uh do red, it's going to if I want to do red, it's going to be FF0000, I believe. And it's going to be red every time I reload it. I want so if I want straight green, then I can do 00FF00. So that's white here. Reload, it's gonna show up as green. So basically what's happening here is the value is actually an attribute. And that attribute is being changed every time you type in something or set it, for example, the color picker. So in essential, what you're doing is you're just getting that value of the attribute called value. And something to always remember, don't just run this in your script, always have it inside of a function. That way the user can control when it's done. So for example, if I forgot to put this in a function and did this, then this would be green because when this page loads, the value is going to be that's just lime green. So it's gonna go in immediately and it's gonna say, oh, the value is lime green, so I'm gonna set the background color to lime green. And so the user can't really control that. And especially with text inputs, for example, you don't want to get the password before the user even types it in. So keep in mind, always put that inside of a function. Okay, so a brief summary. To display information, you're going to want a dedicated div, which is a block element, so it displays as a block, and span, which is inline, so it can go inside of a block and doesn't change lines with an ID, so you don't accidentally select something else. And use inner text to display text and inner HTML only if you want to add an element in there or potentially want to do that. For inputs, have a span right before each input or a label to tell the user what to put inside, and only collect inputs over after user interaction. And always use the appropriate input type because I personally would not want to type in a hex value each time I want to pick a color. That color picker is very useful. And when I'm typing a password into a site, it's really useful for it to be showing up as those like little stars instead of my actual password in case like someone's looking over my shoulder or something. So just use the correct type of input. Okay, now with that, we have around 10 minutes left. Another project. So make another folder with an HTML and JavaScript file. So here we can actually start putting what we learned together, where we have objects, arrays, and the DOM. So you can make a job application page that asks the user for their for their name, age, profession, school, like resume, something like that. You can, and there's also going to be a file type in here where it's specifically email. And so what the email one does is if you go on your phone and open the keyboard, it's going to show you like add and .com to help you type in your email. So again, same same kind. All sorry, always use the correct type of input. Also, if you want like something like a resume uploader, you can also do a file upload, but that's kind of more difficult than just dot value, so we're not going to deal with that for now. And you can also have them like pick out the date. So job application website, and then grocery list maker. So make an input to ask the user how many items they want in a grocery list. And then using the inner HTML, you can add in that many inputs. And then finally, the user can click a button to have all the values of those inputs put into an array and give the array to the user. So we have around 9 minutes left now. You have basically until the end of class. Okay, so we have around 1 minute left, around 4 minutes left in class, so I'm gonna try and get through a few more slides. So in JavaScript, instead of just doing like addition and subtraction and multiplication, you can also do a bit more advanced stuff. So, for example, instead of typing pi out, you have the math.pi object. So math.pi basically this is pi 3.14159265, etc. So you don't have to memorize it. There's also more methods like .e, which is natural natural log, the base of natural logs. There's the floor, which is basically just rounding, but it goes down every time. So for example, 3, 3.5 would go down to 3, 3.7 would go down to 3, 3.9 would go down to 3 because it's flooring. So for example, if you have an elevator that actually displayed physically where you were, if you weren't on the 3.2nd floor, then the floor below your feet would be the third floor. So just always going down. And then there's also ceiling. So if you were on the 3.1st floor, the ceiling above you would still be the fourth floor ceiling. So it would be four. So ceiling is basically just always going up. Math out round. It's just like basic rounding you learn in school. If it's less than 0.5, go down. If it's more than 0.5, go up. If it's 0.5, still go up. Uh, there's also truncate, which is going to be a bit special here. It's just going to return the integer part. So let me open something real quick. So basically every one of these will output a 4 because it's just going it's it's just going to be the integer part. So if it's negative, it's just going to ignore the decimal and everything after the decimal. So 4.7, 4.2 is always going to be 4. Sorry, negative 4 in this case. If it's 4 dot anything, then it's just going to be a 4. This is kind of useful when you're doing certain applications and want to like distinguish between like negative and positives. There's also like math dot sign, and now there's max and min, so you can use that to get the maximum and minimum values of an array. So if you give it a list of numbers, it's gonna give you min is gonna give you the smallest one, max is going to give you the greatest one. And finally, one last thing for randoms, you in JavaScript, there's really only gonna be one random method, except if you're gonna go like really deep and use like crypto. So that's going to be math.random. It generates a random decimal between 0 to 1. So this I can just show you in here. So math.random will be 0.855 something. So it's always going to be between 0 and 1. And everything is equally likely. So it's like a pretty good just randomizer. But then there's also, if you just want a random integer between X and Y, you could do first of all math.floor and then math.random times math. Say I want to generate something between 10 and 1, so that's going to be 10 minus 1 plus 1. And it's going to be 6, 3, 6, 1, 6, 5, 4, 9, 9. So it's going to be between 1 and 10, but 10 is not included. So the max is always not going to be included. because for math.random, you can get a 0, but you actually cannot get 1. There's no chance to get a 1. So that's just something to keep in mind if you want to generate some like random string or uh give the user a random string. For example, if I go to google.com here, there's this thing called I'm feeling lucky, right? If I hover over it, it says I'm feeling toodly. I feel so it's random. What's happening here is say it has a list of 20 things that could state you, and it's choosing a random integer between 1 and 20 using math.random, and then displaying the one that corresponds to that number. Okay, with that, you are free to go. Bye bye.
Bye.